Somewhere in the Midwest in the early 1900s, a family knew which trees on their street produced food in June. They called them Juneberries. They picked them, they dried them. They made pies. Their grandchildren call the same trees ornamentals and walk past them on the way to the grocery store to pay $8 for a pint of blueberries. The berries on the ornamental trees have more antioxidants than the blueberries in that pint. The trees are still producing, nobody is picking. Two things explain why a berry their research has found to be more nutritious than blueberries. Grown on trees planted by municipal governments across North America at public expense, falls to the pavement every June and disappears without anyone eating it. One involves how a food that was a staple crop for entire civilizations became invisible in the space of 2 generations. Through a change in vocabulary rather than a change in the tree. The other involves what happens when an institution responsible for planting a tree categorizes it by one of its properties while omitting another. And the generation that inherits the tree inherits only the category that was recorded by the end of this video. You will understand exactly what serviceberries are, what the research says about their nutritional value, why Lewis and Clark survived a crossing of the Rocky Mountains eating them, and why the tree producing them may already be growing within walking distance of where you are sitting right now. The place to start is not with the grocery store. It is with the continent before the grocery store existed. Amelanchier, the genus that includes all the species commonly called serviceberry, Juneberry, or Saskatoon, is one of the most widespread native food plants in North America. It grows naturally from Alaska to Newfoundland, from the Canadian prairies to the mountains of the American South. There are somewhere between 20 and 30 species depending on which botanist is doing the counting. And they all produce the same fundamental thing: a small, dark purple berry that ripens in June. Looks almost exactly like a blueberry, and tastes like a cross between a blueberry and an almond, with a hint of sweetness that most people who try it for the first time describe as fuller and more complex than the cultivated blueberry they paid $8 for at the grocery store. Native nations across the continent knew this plant as a fundamental food, not a supplementary one. The Cree, the Ojibwe, the Blackfoot, the Lakota, the Cherokee, and dozens of other nations incorporated serviceberries into their staple food systems in ways that blueberries, despite their modern superfood status, never achieved. The berries were eaten fresh during the brief June window when they ripen. They were dried in large quantities for winter storage, spread on flat rocks or woven mats in the summer sun, until the moisture reduced and the sugars concentrated into something that could be stored without refrigeration through a winter on the northern plains. They were pounded together with dried meat and rendered fat to make pemmican, the high-calorie, long-lasting food that enabled winter travel, sustained war parties, and kept communities alive through the months when fresh food was unavailable and the ground was frozen solid. A single productive serviceberry stand could contribute meaningfully to a family's winter food supply in a way that required no cultivation, no planting, no soil preparation, and no management beyond showing up in June with a basket and knowledge of where the productive individuals grew, the knowledge of which trees produced well, which slopes ripened first, which stands were most reliable year to year. This was genuine ecological knowledge, accumulated over generations, that made the difference between a winter with adequate food and a winter without. Lewis and Clark knew this. Their journals from the 1804 to 1806. Corps of Discovery Expedition document multiple encounters with serviceberries across the continent. Meriwether Lewis described the berries in detail at various points in the expedition, noting their appearance, their taste, and their practical value as trail food. The Corps ate them fresh when they found them along the Missouri and its tributaries. They relied on the dried version traded from native communities during difficult stretches of the journey when other food sources were scarce. They specifically noted the berry's value as a food capable of sustaining significant physical effort. The same berry that ripens on the ornamental tree outside your office sustained one of the most physically demanding expeditions in American history, across more than 8,000 miles of largely unmapped continent. Stay with me, because the number that comes next is the part that makes walking past this tree on the way to the grocery store difficult to justify once you have heard it. Research published in food science literature has found that serviceberries, specifically the Saskatoon berry species Amelanchier unifolia, contain anthocyanin concentrations comparable to or exceeding those of cultivated blueberries. More antioxidant capacity than blueberries. More than strawberries, more than raspberries. A review of multiple studies on Saskatoon berry composition found that the berries are a rich source of antioxidant compounds, including cyanidin, 3-O-galactoside, and cyanidin, 3-O-glucoside, the same anthocyanin pigments responsible for the health-associated properties of blueberries and dark cherries, in concentrations that place them at or above the blueberry benchmark that the modern superfood market has been built around. The Philly Orchards Project, which has documented the nutritional properties of service berries as part of urban food forestry research, found the berry's profile striking enough to feature it prominently in their public education materials. Multiple studies placed the Juneberry's antioxidant capacity at or above blueberries, with iron and fiber levels that exceed most commonly marketed alongside vitamin C, vitamin A, magnesium, folate, and phosphorus in meaningful concentrations. This is not a marginal nutritional profile. It is the profile of a berry that, had it come from a different continent with a different history, would be sitting at the center of the same billion-dollar superfood market that blueberries, acai, and goji berries currently occupy. Instead, it is falling on the pavement outside City Hall. The serviceberry was a food tree before it was an ornamental tree. Native communities managed stands of it deliberately, pruning them, protecting productive individuals, returning to the same trees season after season as a matter of seasonal food calendar planning. Early European settlers in North America encountered the berry, recognized its value, and adopted it into their own food practices. The Juneberry pie that the Midwestern family in the early 1900s made from the trees on their street was not a folk curiosity. It was a direct continuation of a food tradition that predated European contact by thousands of years. What changed was not the tree. What changed was how the people responsible for planting trees in public spaces categorized it. Through the late 19th and 20th centuries, as American cities expanded and civic horticulture developed as a profession, with its own standards, its own vocabulary, and its own institutional logic, the way trees were classified for public planting divided sharply between ornamental and fruiting categories. Fruiting trees in public spaces were considered problems. The fallen fruit created mess on sidewalks, attracted pests that became nuisances, created potential liability when someone slipped on a fallen berry, and required cleanup budgets that city parks departments did not want to fund. The ornamental category was strongly preferred for public plantings. Trees that produced flowers, seasonal color, and attractive architectural form without the complication of edible fruit that fell, fermented, and attracted wildlife. The serviceberry was ideal for the ornamental category in every way that mattered to a city horticulturist making planting decisions in 1960. It blooms white in very early spring, often before almost anything else in the landscape has stirred, producing a cloud of small flowers against bare branches that is genuinely striking and arrives at a moment when people are most desperate for any sign of seasonal change. Its autumn color is consistently excellent orange, red, and purple, in a sequence that holds through the fall weeks more reliably than many showier trees. Its mature form is graceful, multi-stemmed, and appropriately scaled for street planting in a way that large canopy trees are not. It tolerates urban soil compaction, road salt, air pollution, and the particular stresses of a sidewalk tree cutout, with the kind of quiet resilience that makes a city arborist's maintenance budget easier to manage. It was planted everywhere, in enormous quantities, along residential streets, in institutional landscapes, in parking lot medians, at the edges of parks and public buildings, in the kind of locations that required something attractive, low maintenance, and appropriately sized. Across every major city in the northern half of North America, serviceberry went in by the hundreds of thousands of individuals through the second half of the 20th century, and the people who specified it for planting called it ornamental, not fruiting, not edible, ornamental. The label that went on the specification sheet, the label that went into the maintenance record, the label that shaped every subsequent interaction between the city and the tree. It was a label that contained no information about what the tree produced in June. The family in the early 1900s who knew what the trees were planted for and went out in June with baskets was the last generation for whom the tree's identity as a food plant was part of its publicly understood description. The generation that followed them grew up with a tree that the official vocabulary of the city had reclassified. The knowledge that it was edible was not forbidden or hidden. It was simply not transmitted because the institution responsible for planting the tree no longer included that function in the tree's official identity. What is not named does not get passed on, and what does not get passed on is forgotten within a generation. By the time the grandchildren arrived, the tree was an ornamental. The berry it produced every June was bird food, and the grocery store was stocking blueberries in plastic pints at $8 each. The tree did nothing wrong. The label did everything. Here is what the research community and the urban food movement have been quietly documenting for the past 2 decades, mostly without any of it reaching the mainstream conversation about what people should be eating or where it grows for free. Serviceberry is experiencing a gradual rediscovery within urban food forestry circles. Among foragers, in permaculture-designed communities, and in the pages of urban agriculture research that has been accumulating since cities began to take seriously the idea that food could be grown in public spaces rather than only purchased from them in a small but growing commercial agricultural sector in Western Canada. The Saskatoon berry has maintained a commercial cultivation industry that never fully disappeared from the prairie provinces that built food systems around it before European contact, and simply continued at reduced scale throughout the 20th century. Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba produce commercial Saskatoon berry crops for jam, wine, juice, and dried berry products, sold regionally and in specialty food markets further afield. The berry that disappeared from most Americans' awareness never disappeared from the Canadian prairie food culture that inherited it from Indigenous agricultural tradition. Agricultural universities in Western Canada have maintained ongoing research into serviceberry cultivation, precisely because the provincial food culture retained enough institutional memory of the berry's value to sustain that research interest. Named commercial cultivars have been developed and released for growers, selected for consistent berry size, flavor, and productivity at farm scale. The agronomic profile of the Saskatoon as a cultivated crop is straightforward. It is productive without heavy inputs. It is disease-resistant in ways that cultivated blueberry, a notoriously demanding crop requiring acidic, carefully amended soil, is not. It is cold-hardy to temperatures that would kill most blueberry cultivars outright. The ornamental varieties planted across American and Canadian cities are not these selected commercial cultivars. They were chosen for flower density, autumn color, and urban tolerance rather than berry productivity. But they still produce fruit, every June, on every street where they were planted, in quantities sufficient to make the walk from any residential street worth taking with a bag in hand during the 3rd week of June. The birds already know this. They have always known it. The city just forgot to tell the people. The identification is simple enough that almost anyone can learn it with a single afternoon of attention in the right season. Serviceberry flowers are white and appear very early in spring, before most other street trees show any sign of life, which makes them unusually easy to locate and mark for return in June when the berries ripen. The leaves are oval, softly rounded, with fine serrations along the edge. The berries ripen from green to red to dark purple-blue in June, hanging in small clusters that look from a distance indistinguishable from a blueberry cluster. They are slightly larger than blueberries on average, with the same bloom-dusted skin and the same crown-like remnant calyx at the tip. Taste one. That is the simplest identification test available, and the most reliable. A ripe serviceberry tastes like a blueberry that has been crossed with a mild almond. It is distinctly pleasant, distinctly recognizable, and entirely unlike anything that should cause confusion with an inedible or harmful berry. The texture is soft and juicy when ripe. The flavor is complex enough that the people who eat them regularly find cultivated blueberries comparatively flat afterward. One practical note worth including: the berries ripen and drop very quickly, often over a period of 1 to 2 weeks in any given location. Birds know the timing better than most humans do, and will strip a productive tree within days of peak ripeness. If the tree is in a location birds frequent heavily, early June is the window in most of the northern United States and southern Canada. A week earlier, in warmer urban microclimates, a week later, at higher elevations, or in cooler northern sites, the tree will tell you when it is time. The berries turn from red to deep purple-blue, and the birds appear. Those two signals together mean the window is open. The family in the early 1900s read these signals as a matter of course. June meant Juneberry time, the same way September meant apple time and October meant walnut time. The seasonal food calendar that oriented their relationship to the landscape around them included this tree the way it included every other productive plant on or near their property. Their grandchildren have a grocery store. The grocery store has blueberries, $8 a pint. The serviceberry tree outside the grocery store is producing the same berry for free right now, or will be in June, or was last June, while everyone walked past it on the way in to pay $8 for an inferior version. The research says it is more nutritious. The history says it sustained entire civilizations and crossed the Rocky Mountains in a leather pack. The city planted it on the street because it is beautiful in spring and tolerates the indignities of urban soil without complaint. Nobody put a sign on it. The trees are still producing. The berries are still falling. And somewhere in the Midwest, if you look carefully enough at the old ornamental trees planted along a residential street in a neighborhood. That has not changed much since the 1950s. You can find a tree that was already old when the family who knew what it was still lived in the house at the end of the block. They called it the Juneberry tree. They went out with baskets in the third week of June, when the berries had turned from red to the deep purple-blue that meant they were fully ripe. They came back with more than they could eat fresh, and spent an afternoon spreading the rest on screens to dry. They made pies from the fresh ones when the season was right. They stirred the dried ones into oatmeal through the following winter. They knew the tree's name, its season, and what it meant when the birds appeared in it suddenly in early June, because the birds knew the timing better than anyone and always arrived before the peak. Their grandchildren call it an ornamental walk past it, drive to the store, a berry more nutritious than blueberries, produced for free on trees planted by the city on every street in North America. Ripens every June and feeds the birds because the people who could be picking it no longer know that it was ever food. The family in the early 1900s who knew which trees on their street produced food in June was the last generation for whom that knowledge was simply part of what you knew about where you lived. The knowledge can be recovered in the time it takes to walk a block in June. Look up at the right tree and pick one berry. It tastes like something you should have been eating your whole life. If you found this genuinely useful, watch the next video and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next one.